All right, good evening. We're recording and we're meeting tonight with Tony-Karman. And I've known you at least 30 years, isn't it at least 30 years?
It's 30 years, Paul. That's a scary, scary mark to note.
And, wow, wow. And, so you now head up one of the larger art fairs in the world, EXPOChicago. And where did you go to high school? Where did you grow up?
Grew up in the Quad Cities, Rock Island, Illinois. A big Greek immigrant family in the Quad Cities with a big Greek immigrant family in Chicago. And in 1982, I decided to move here. What I thought was going to be 2 months turned into 30 years.
Did you think when you were in high school that you were going to be an artist?
You know, it's interesting. I had this conversation with someone recently. I always drew. I always was creative. Came from a family of both artists and writers and musicians. Arts were very prevalent in our family. Took classes throughout my childhood. So arts were always very much a part of our day-to-day. I actually thought I was going to be a medical illustrator and had pursued both a degree in science as well as fine arts, and of course I'm doing neither. But
so how did you get off track? What did you major in college?
Majored in fine arts and literature. I did a lot of painting, actually did a lot of ceramics, did a lot of biology, and I was preparing for what I thought was going to be medical illustration, but it very quickly became a BFA and a great balanced degree. And I made a decision back then to not go the creative route, and I think that's important. I mean, I still love to paint, I still love to draw, but I've never chosen to do that for anything other than myself. And I got very active in college in concerts and production, and my career in the arts has always been in the administrative side. Now, I might be saying that out of sheer fear to step out, as many of the artists that are involved in this webcast or webinar. I have great respect for any artist that decides to pursue their own voice and pursue their absolute need to go ahead and create. For me, I found the administrative side of the arts equally as creative and challenging, and the pursuit of actually doing the art a little bit more personal and not for sale, not for a pursuit of getting a gallery or having that type of career.
Let's talk about the challenge part thing you just alluded to a moment ago. How much is the challenge of seeing the show successful? And then I guess the corollary question is once you've responded to and met the challenge and you're at the place where you can say, all right, I've done that, then how do you keep going?
I mean, with the fair?
For anything.
Anything.
I'm using you as an example of how an artist would say, all right, I got to that plateau I thought I wasn't going to get to. Now what do I do?
Well, I think in life, in fact, I was listening to Michael's conversations, which I found, and his suggestions to be instructive in so many ways. There really is never an apex here. I mean, there's, at any moment, you can see how tenuous any place is, whether it's that moment of getting representation and being with a gallery and maybe selling a work, or in my case, an art fair that is always evolving, that will never ever really find, it will find its own rhythm and voice as any product does, but we're only as good as that last voice, that last statement, and we're always asked to adjust. I think the art world demands that of us, to refine and grow and change. So I don't know if there's ever a moment to take a break.
When were you first involved with an art fair?
I moved here in 1982, And as story goes, in fact, it was probably when you and I met, I was a security guard for what was then the Chicago International Art Exposition. All the trucks came in, which I had to make sure all the trucks came in as the show was being built. And by the end of the fair, I had made myself totally indispensable, really doing everything, running crates, working with the dealers, whatever they wanted, and ended up working for what was then the Chicago International Art Exposition for several years. But
how have art fairs changed since then?
I'm sorry?
How have art fairs changed?
Oh my gosh! I mean, speaking about Chicago, in the early '80s, at least when I first experienced a great international fair, for all intents and purposes, there were only 3 art fairs in the world. It was the Chicago International Art Exposition, which was the only art fair in North and South America, Art Basel, and Art Cologne. And when you think about that, the art world was so different. There wasn't that, this extraordinary explosion of galleries, or even collectors, for that sake. I mean, that it was a smaller world, and I think that you could even look to some of the collectors in Chicago that built the MCA, for example. They had access to artists in the 80s and 90s that would be very difficult to achieve at this time. I mean, and that's around the world. Art fairs have changed because what was, then 3 art fairs, now there's, and don't quote me on this because I'm not sure the total, there's probably 333, right? I mean, it's become a much more important part of the gallery's positioning. It's been a much more important part of the actual sell or commerce.
How does it change how the marketplace is? I mean, obviously a lot more art is sold at art fairs than it used to be, and from my discussions with dealers, most of them who participate in art fairs sell more at art fairs than they do everywhere else combined.
No, I've heard that. I think that the problem in many ways is, the bricks and mortar gallery space or the exhibition attendance has declined, and the opportunity for collectors or potential buyers for an artist's work are happening at the art fairs in greater percentage, exactly what you just said. I think it's changed the whole paradigm of the way an artist works with a gallery, or if the gallery has to do an art fair.
How?
Well, I realized this early on in, when I was involved not only with the past art fair in Chicago, but this current one. It's an interesting ecosystem that we all work within. Galleries have to decide what art fairs they're doing, because there is a label that's applied to a gallery that may be doing this fair or that fair. An art gallery has to decide what trajectory they want to be in. Do they want to be in an art fair that is, that may be very well received, but might not get them if their end game is to an Art Basel or whatever. There's a positioning that a dealer has to go through, which is another layer, I think, of many of the challenges within the challenges and opportunities, I should say, within the global art world.
Do you think that art fairs have changed the kind of art that artists make?
That's a tough question. I guess in many ways, I think that an artist is inspired by their own voice and their own determination and their own schedule based on what work they're being asked to produce, either for an exhibition in a gallery or specifically for an art fair. I
think there's more art that's approaching 30 by 40 inches.
I was going to say, I think that to some extent, sure, I wouldn't, it would be wrong of me not to say that the opportunity to show in an art fair and to actually sell at an art fair might mean that, there's different requests or demands on an artist, but that probably always has been. I mean, you could go historically. That may have been specifically what, a modern master may have done, as opposed to you know. Raphael. I'm sorry.
Oh, I think that's right. I know, but you said it so many times. We know your opinion.
Oh. How do I turn down John?
Okay, wasn't sure. But you know, I mean, look at the way the art world has changed, even from, you know, you look at work from the turn of the century, or you know, work that was very much salon style and in homes that could never actually show a large scale work. Now work has become you know, large scale, 40 by 60, 60 by 80. I mean, that's, you know, homes are even being built to accommodate work that, you know, if you look at 100 years ago, could never have been actually shown correctly.
Do you have any sense of statistics? I mean, like when Arts Magazine publishes the top 100 collectors, but let's take, you know, the contemporary art fair, the contemporary art collectors. What percentage of those 10 top 100 collectors do you think buy most of their art at art fairs? The top echelon of collectors.
I don't want to sound like I'm dodging when I say this. To some extent, work may be shown at an art fair, but it's the convening moment of an art fair that may allow for both a dealer and a collector to actually.
Right, let's say how many, but when we say sold at an art fair, let's say, you know, where the art fair played an integral part in the transaction.
Well, I would say it's a large percentage at this point. I mean, I hear conversations. In fact, you know, I've had conversations with dealers just even today, talking about work that was sold at Expo Chicago that really was teed up in conversations prior to the fair last year. You know, images were exchanged, but the actual consummation of the deal, if you have to distill it down to that, or the exchange was done, you know, at the art fair, because it was an opportunity for individuals to not only be together, rather than just the impersonal exchange of an email or you know, via web. Not that the webinar is impersonal, but the opportunity to actually stand next to the work and talk with the dealer was allowed for the exchange to take place. I think there's more and more.
I think so too. Do you think there's a stratification that goes on though? I mean, how many different levels of art fairs do you have? 2 or 3?
In well, boy, in what way? Maybe I can drill in and level of art fairs as in quality or as in cost? What do you mean?
I'm thinking mostly in terms of quality. I'm wondering about stratification of galleries. I'm wondering if, you know, you're a gallery that cannot get into very many art fairs, but you used to do an okay business. Are they getting more stratified? Is the art world much more successful at the higher end and leaving the middle folks out? Does the fact that they can't get into an art fair part of that equation, or it's just coincidental? That kind of stuff.
I mean, I think it's somewhat coincidental. I think that the art fairs there's so many different art fairs, and there's so many different ways for galleries to participate. You know, there's only a few, depending on how you want to grade it. You know, top quality fairs. You know, we surely, with Expo Chicago, aspire to be one of the top international contemporary modern fairs in the world, but it doesn't mean that we're the only one, of course. And you know, there's a lot of different ways that galleries can participate. There's regional fairs that have surely grown in number across the U.S. and across Europe. I think, you know, there's a lot of different ways for a gallery to build a resume and participate without necessarily saying they have to be in the, you know, the top 10 shows in the world. However, I think it's what I was getting to. I mean, a program of a gallery is the first item that's being looked at by any selection committee for any major international fair. And
time out. Why don't you explain how that works? The selection committee. How do people apply? How do they get into a fair?
Simple process. There's an application on any of the art fair websites, I would think, or there's applications that are sent out to galleries from all over the world. It's an opportunity for them to fill in what they choose to bring, potentially a program overview. To some extent, there are galleries that give very thoughtful applications on blending, let's say, a juxtaposition with historical work and contemporary work. And so it's an opportunity for a gallery to actually state make an exhibition statement. That information is sent, applications are sent into an art fair, and in many cases, I can speak for Expo Chicago, we have a selection committee of 4 individuals that will review all of those applications and select what I expect to be about 120 different exhibitors for Expo Chicago. It's a pretty rigorous process. My role is to make sure that all of the applications are reviewed, and all of the applications and the galleries are reviewed for not only what art fairs that they are participating in. If they're not participating in an art fair, they're reviewed for the artists and the work. And you know, it's a 2-3 day process done right. And you know, ultimately, I think it's the selection committee, or having a selection committee for an art fair, is really that important statement for, you know, quality and review. And I think that's the hallmark of any great international art fair, and surely is, speaking about Expo Chicago, our commitment.
What are the factors that make an art fair successful? Does it hinge a lot on the dealers? Does it hinge a lot on the collectors? Do you have to work on both ends of that equation?
You know, that's the chicken and the egg that has always been. You know, you can't really get the great collectors to come unless you have great dealers, and you can't get great dealers to come unless you have the great collectors coming. And so, you know, that it's an important balance. I think that there's a lot of factors that are critical to the success for an exhibitor, for an art fair. I mean, you as a past gallery owner know that there's a lot of ways that you can judge success. Success, in the most basic of way, can be graded on, you know, how much artwork you've sold. But you know as well as I, if you have been introduced to new collectors that might look at your program and look at the artists and the artwork that you're representing, and you can groom a relationship with over the next few months or years to make that first sale, that's equally as important. The third way that an art fair is important is, obviously, we need to do our job to make sure that the curators from around, speaking about Expo Chicago, the curators from the greater Midwest are well in attendance, as well as the national and international curators. And I think that if the curators are there, it's an opportunity for the dealers to not only showcase some work of their artists, to hopefully place that in shows across the country or internationally, but also begin a dialogue with that curator for other projects that they may have coming up in the future. And I think from an artist engaging an art fair standpoint, it's always difficult and delicate to some extent, as they relate potentially, if they're unrepresented, to the galleries that are in the show. But there's such opportunities there to not only connect with and see you know, a great survey of exhibitors, but also have the opportunity to go listen to some talks, and also have a chance to actually see numerous curators in attendance. I just think that that's the important stew of an art fair. You've got art enthusiasts, you've got museum administrators, you've got curators, you've got museum directors, you have galleries that are participating, galleries that are attending, thinking about participating. You know, it's all of us in this great ecosystem that go to these art fairs. And I think that's, you know, that convening nature is important. And it's important not only to go to one, but to go to many, to really get a sense of, you know, where these fairs sit within the level of stature, and where these fairs can serve both the artists and the dealers that participate.
So most of the galleries that exhibit at your shows tend to repeat and come back, and, you know, are You can almost count on them year after year?
You know, I think so. Honestly, from a fair perspective, that's a great place to be. But I also think that in this changing time, that demand may be difficult to achieve. I think that there's a core of exhibitors that will always participate, or I hope will always participate in Expo Chicago. But I also want to say, for the long run, having galleries come in and come out is not a bad thing either. And I think a fair should not be graded specifically on who is in and who is out, but more be graded on that year's quality of work and the artwork that will be presented. Because the demands on a dealer is great now. I mean, I know many of the exhibitors that are doing and have done Expo Chicago and are considering it, are doing 5, 10 major shows in the world, and to ask them or to expect them to come back every year, I think is difficult. In fact, I've talked to several dealers that said that do only the major fairs in the world, that said, look, I think I want to do Chicago. I probably will do the fair, but I may want to rotate that in every 2 years. And I have to say, I find that to be a fascinating opportunity. And we'll see as Expo Chicago matures if that happens. But Paul, I actually think, and to all of you listening, I actually think that that's something that I would hope. If you ask me a percentage, maybe it's 30 or 40%, but if that 30-40% is rotating, not because they didn't do well, but because they have other commitments, and it allows me a greater chance to bring in international exhibitors and provide a greater perspective for collectors in Chicago and the world that come to see, great. Hope that was a long.
I like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
How do you, as a fair organizer, determine your success?
I think a lot of that success has to deal with just, well, speaking about that issue of retention, I think a lot of that success is judged by the satisfaction of the exhibitors that are participating. After all, I need the exhibitors that are taking a chance on this show to see, as I said, collectors, curators, art enthusiasts around the world. And if they choose to keep coming back, clearly that's successful. It's really important to me, and I've said this publicly, and obviously this is another wonderful public forum. It's the art first. We're all in this business to make sure that the artwork and the artists represented are first and foremost cared for in the most respectful of ways. And I think that for me, a successful art fair will be, one where not only are we providing an opportunity for, the artists to actually sell their work, but more importantly, for them to meet and build their careers.
What are your tasks in different months of the year?
It's it's fascinating. It's a lot of work for something that only happens for 5 days. We began working on the 2013 fair, the upcoming 2013 fair, literally the day after the inaugural fair closed. There's a lot of work to be done as we make decisions on the size of the fair or just the systems of the fair immediately. Our outreach to the regional museums and collectors began immediately. That's something that's very important to Expo Chicago. We're not looking to necessarily be a regional fair. In fact, we're not a regional fair, but I've always believed you can't stir the region, or you can't stir the important collectors and curators and institutions if you're not a great international fair. And I think it's important to us to make sure that we do two things. We reach the collectors and curators of the greater Midwest, and also build greater international collector and curator attendance as well. But that outreach had to begin literally the week after last year's fair. So right now it has been, last year we built programs that never existed. We built a program called Dialogues, or conference and panel programming, or in situ, which is our site-specific and large-scale work. None of those things even existed because it was an inaugural fair. This year, immediately after the fair, we're able to refine it. very soon this week, I'll probably be announcing the new curator for the in situ program for the fair. Last year, we worked with Michael Ned Holte, a professor at CalArts, curator as well as a essayist that contributes to a number of top magazines throughout the world. He is just tapped as a co-curator of the 2014 Hammer Biennial, and that was an extraordinary opportunity to work with Michael in the inaugural year. In the next week, we'll be announcing our 2013 curator. So what I'm getting at is now we get to build and refine and add to everything that we established last year. And then very soon, the galleries will be selected. I would hope to have a gallery list out like we did last year about June, and then obviously we're working with the galleries to actually determine the size of their booth and how they're building it. Concurrently, we're working with our VIP outreach, and the VIP kits start going out in July. So, you know, there's a lot of systems that are layered to make sure the art fair works.
Is most of the decision-making process about participating in an art fair? I'm thinking of the gallery. Is it mostly up to one person, or I mean, like, I don't know. Are there couples that own art galleries, or where it's Joe and Nancy's art gallery and Joe and Nancy? You know, like who's? I'm just curious about the decision-making process on the gallery side.
You know, I bet I could never find a simple single answer. Some dealers that are, you know, from their eponymous gallery, as you had, can make a decision themselves. Others, I know this from experience, will talk to their staff and the directors of their galleries or staff of the galleries, and, you know, gauge the sheer impact that that another art fair will, you know, give to what they're wanting to do, not only with other art fairs, but their own exhibition program. And I think that, you know, I'm mindful of this. You know, it's a lot to ask of a gallery outside of Chicago to carve out the time, not only adjust what they aren't doing in their for their own program or their own exhibition schedule in their own gallery, but then, you know, travel to the city to take that chance. And that's a lot of work, as you know. There's shipping that has to be determined. There's what artwork and inventory has to be determined. There's the, you know, the hotels and the staffing and the marketing, etc. So for a gallery to make a commitment to an art fair done right, it impacts everything. So you know, some galleries that are larger, that decision might be made solely by the owner or the principal of the gallery. Smaller galleries, I bet it's much more democratic, and everybody decides, can we handle one more event?
Okay. Why don't we open this up to some questions and see who else is, you know, well, yeah, take some more questions. Do you feel like art fairs should or should not include galleries that do not have a brick and mortar location?
I think that it's going to, right now, our commitment is you have to have a bricks and mortar facility, and you have to have a full exhibition schedule. I think that most of the major international fairs would concur. In fact, they all would. That's a standard with which we all hold as in true and important. I would say that down the road, things may change or may not. I mean, I think that that's a basic standard that I think is important to not only protect the exhibitor, but the dealers in the art world as it exists and as it has existed. You know, I think that the art dealer in many ways plays an extraordinary role on behalf of building and working and funding and shaping the career of an artist. And I think that conversely, I'm not saying that I also know that artists have done extremely well, some unrepresented, that have no relationship with a gallery, that have taken a different tact to how they want to work and how they want to sell or how they want to place their artwork. Paul, I think I would honestly say I can't imagine that the criteria that we discussed I don't see that changing for a long time, because I think it's important that galleries exist to really build and shape and protect, in many ways, in the most purest of ways, an artist-dealer relationship. And I think it's it's imperative for art fairs to keep that, to respect that.
Okay. John Edding, you have a question. Go ahead, John.
I'm wondering, Tony, what is it that you feel that the Chicago area has to offer for art fairs that the rest of the world doesn't? What advantages are there to come here as opposed to someplace else? What's unique about Chicago?
Twofold. I think in many ways, what is unique about Chicago is some of the things that we may not herald. I think that, John, the reason that Expo Chicago exists, and I hope that it serves the greater ecosystem, as I keep saying, is that there's an extraordinary amount of institutions, artists, galleries, and history here that give us, a pretty important place in the international calendar as well as the art world. I'm not expecting that what was in 1980 can necessarily be recreated, although I do know we have extraordinary art institutions with the Museum of Contemporary Art and the Art Institute and the SMART and the Wren and the Bloch Museum and Renaissance Society, I can go on, that are making huge statements throughout the world. And there's no doubt that galleries from around the world want to come to make sure that they're in touch with not only our great collectors, but our great institutions. One more bit of shading. I think it's important. I think many of the exhibitors that are participating in Expo Chicago are hoping that we're serving the greater Midwest in ways that are important, that we're drawing the tertiary cities to a great international city like Chicago once a year and give them an opportunity to touch the greater Midwest collector base. Now, that's important to us. Of course, we're looking to the coast. Of course, we're looking internationally. And I've just traveled from ARCO in Madrid, not only to talk with galleries, but actually to be meeting with a number of Latin American collectors that, we hope to see up in Chicago this year. But I think that Art World wants us to make sure that we're working closely with Kansas City and St. Louis and Toronto and Dallas and Houston and Tulsa and Louisville and Indianapolis and Minneapolis. I can go on and on. Those collectors and institutions are, very powerful and there's a lot of great collectors there. And I think Chicago always was a place where they felt very comfortable in coming. One other thing, I hope when these collectors and curators come, that they're not only seeing what is happening at Expo Chicago, but they're also seeing what's happening with not only our artists, but our galleries that are representing, whether they're doing the fair or not. I think it's important that we take this moment done right and showcase what's really happening here, because there's a lot. So I hope that's an answer.
Thank you, guys. Which is the biggest art fair by attendance, Tony?
Let's see. I would, I would bet Maastricht in the TIFAF Maastricht, probably by virtue of, it's a 10-day fair. I think that most of the major fairs are 50, 60,000. I would think, you're talking about Art Basel and Frieze.
50, 60,000 people.
Yes. Yes.
Over a period of, what, 4 or 5 days, typically?
5 days, typically. Most are Wednesday to Sunday fairs.
How much which ones are the most expensive?
You know what?
For exhibitor.
You know what? I'm sorry that I don't know that, because you'd have to calculate, both. You'd have to calculate euro and pound and whatever. I think that, I think many of the art fairs majors are in the, depending on the city. I know that in New York, the per square footage cost for an exhibitor is in the 80s. I think that's pretty general for, most of the major fairs in the world. $80 a square foot. To give you an example, Chicago is about $51 a square foot. Now, that doesn't mean that that they're more expensive because they're anything more than, it's dealing with different cities, different calculations, and different size.
So yeah, all right. Let's back up. So let's say someone's taking an average large size booth, which is how many square feet? 200? More.
No, the largest booth.
400.
I think that the average size booth is around 500, 600 square feet. A 600 square foot booth at Expo Chicago is $30,000.
And somewhere else it might be 50,000.
Correct.
So I mean, I'm trying to give these guys, a sense of what an art dealer's investment in that expense is, which is a lot of the reason that you don't want to spend much time talking to an art dealer about yourself at an art fair, because they really need to focus on recouping their investment and coming out ahead.
I mean, there's cost to the art fair, then there's shipping costs, then there's hotel and housing costs for the staff that they've brought in. There's marketing costs, and any kind of entertainment costs on top of that. So, you can see very quickly where that could exceed $100,000. I'm making this up. I mean, I'm sure to some it's much more and some it's much less. But, if you've got that as your nut, as you call it, it's a lot of pressure for the galleries, and they need to see some results. And that's where I work awfully hard to make sure that they see the right individuals. And remember, transactions at the fair aren't necessarily the full judge of a success. As you know, Paul, many sales come immediately after the fair, or 6 months from the fair, or you might meet a collector at an art fair that doesn't buy anything from you for 2 or 3 years and ends up buying 20 or 30 works from an artist that they love. I mean, there's most dealers recognize the long-term approach, and most dealers recognize, or they all recognize, to some extent, this is a marketing initiative. But the cost of doing an art fair is not inexpensive, and that's not lost on me to make sure that we're providing as much as we can to make them successful.
How many art fairs do you think some galleries do on the high end?
Oh, I mean, there's certain dealers that love to do a ton of art fairs by virtue of this new paradigm. But I think most of the major galleries that are doing the top international fairs are doing, up to 10 art fairs a year, 7 to 10 art fairs a year.
That's a hell of a lot.
That's a heck of a lot. That's right.
And then are they just shipping work from one art fair to another, or does it go back to the gallery to get, refreshed, reloaded, and cleaned and sent out again? Sometimes it just goes from one show to the next.
I know of a couple of galleries that I spoke to while I was in Europe that reminded me that if they do this fair, they're going to be shipping work to 3 different fairs at the same time, as they will be in Chicago. And think of that load too. That means that there's preparators and installers that are having to prepare work for 4 different locations at once. Now, again, I might be making this up and maybe adding 1 or 2, but that's not too far off. That kind of time and cost is being borne by a gallery as well.
We have some questions.
Sure.
Steve Grossman, go ahead, Steve.
Hi. I was just wondering, do you think galleries pick certain types of work to put in fairs? I mean, other than size constraints and maybe, good quality, obviously, but is there sort of like a genre of art that's evolving?
I think, galleries have your interest in mind in a lot of ways. And I think that there's certain galleries that may look to a region or look to an art fair and gauge or try to gauge what they believe will best showcase their program, as well as give them a good opportunity to actually cover what they need to have covered. But I think that you know, what you'll find and what you saw at our Expo Chicago last year is there's a lot of galleries that took some real chances, and those chances actually allow them, colleague to colleague, to showcase, you know, what, you know, where they are and how they decide how they want to be seen as a dealer in the international art community. And I think that, you know, I think honestly, there's no. I hate to sound like I'm trying to give every side of the coin in this answer, but you know, some dealers are fearless, and some, you know, are much less, you know, risk adverse, and they want to make sure that they do their best to gauge the marketplace.
I'm almost surprised by the number of galleries that show material, typically secondary market stuff, that you never ever see in their gallery.
You know what? I think that to some extent, I think most may be their own inventory, or you know, I think it's an opportunity to actually, as I just said, to give a better chance to do well at an art fair.
Yeah.
But I think
So they might show work that they don't typically show in the gallery on a regular basis.
Yeah, but it might be a Moreau print or a Picasso print, or you know, material like that. It isn't necessarily more risky. It may be more conservative.
Except what we, you know, from a selection committee standpoint, you know, you're being asked to show, to tell us who and what you're going to show to some extent. Now, of course, you know, it's not a complete, you know, it's not a complete lock. You know, dealers have extraordinary latitude to bring great work, especially the dealers that that are doing these major international fairs. But you know, I'm sure there's a few surprises here and there.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Michael Finnegan. Michael, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you. And thanks for speaking with us, Tony.
Oh, I love it.
I was wondering if you could talk about the panel discussions. I enjoyed that last year, and I was wondering if you could maybe give us a hint about what kind of discussions will be happening, you know, resources for the artists that will take place the next.
You know, my colleague that is handles most of the curation of dialogues, which is our conference and panel programming,
Right.
is now building that with some of the dealers that are participating, and some of the artists, and some of the ideas that we want to shape. And so I want to take a little bit of a pass and tell you that I can't announce anything, but what I wanted to say, and I'm not saying that to be cagey at all. I'm actually saying
no, I understand. It's early on.
Many of the things aren't necessarily locked in, but you know, we love having Jerry Saltz here, just for his wonderful perspective and irreverence and knowledge and wisdom. You know, I ran into Jerry in New York a week and a half ago, and you never know, we might have to reprise his participation because
that'd be great.
it's just too damn good. But you know, we want to make sure that what we do is get a great balance of keynotes and artists that can provide a perspective for you, not only to see their work or how they may fit within the context of upcoming exhibitions, but some, you know, some topics that may be of interest. This sounds like another. I would love, and send me an email, right? I mean, I think it's important. Send me an email for what might be interesting to you, and you know, we want to make sure that we're serving. And it's the beautiful thing is, you know, that platform can. We don't have to lock everything next month. It can grow as the art fair established.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll do that.
Yeah, I mean, please do. And, you know, it's an open channel and a discussion. Because, quite honestly, we want to make sure that it's not just talk at, but it's actually, it's got some meat, artistic meat, as well as, you know, a real legacy of discussion. So.
Great. Well, thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank you.
To what extent, Tony, are you actually trying to take the walking viewer into consideration?
Always.
I mean, directly. I mean, my supposition is if the dealers are selling, they're going to be happy, everything is good, so that you don't look at the walk collector participant directly, you look at them indirectly as a result of how much they buy. Does, you know, like the folks at the merchandise mart, it seemed to me always used to want to have a really high gate. You don't seem to be so interested in giving away free tickets everywhere to artificially inflate your numbers. So talk to me about the gate. How, you know, how do you determine what you want? Numbers, quantity, a balance, what?
You know what, I guess my honest answer would be all of that. I mean, you know, it's not about charging to be an uber capitalist, although, you know, there's surely costs of an art fair that I'd love to recoup, but it's not about building the gate to try to build revenue for the fair. In fact, quite honestly, it's the right gate that's important to the exhibitors. You know, I'm not sitting here wanting to take, you know, $20 or $15 from artists. I have no problem making sure tickets are available to artists, etc. That's not my intent. But it's not about flooding the marketplace with a bunch of tickets just to inflate the numbers, because quite honestly, that does a disservice to the exhibitors, and it also does a disservice to the whole show. You know, I want this show to grow in ways that makes an individual want to attend for the services that we hope that we're providing. Great, you know, great exposure to galleries, great opportunity for artists to network, you know, great dialogues and installation programming. And so my charge is to make sure that the value is there for someone that buys that ticket. But my intent is not to drive ticket sales. My intent is to produce a show that also respectfully shows the work in a venue that that does right by the dealer and the artist that's being represented. And I think that's the critical differentiation. I mean, many people have heard me say it's quality, not quantity. And that quality, not quantity, relates to so many different things, both the attendee as well as the exhibitors that are doing the fair. So anyway, long answer, as I'm long-winded to some extent, but you know, it's the right gate that will sustain an art fair. And there's no director of an art fair nor owner of an art fair that wouldn't say this. It's not the 52,000, it's the right 2,000 that will ultimately drive the success of an art fair. Now, of course, an art fair also has to provide a service that opens, you know, potentially an individual up to be a new collector, that allows someone that has never experienced art to survey, you know, a great collection. They can see historic work, they can see challenging work, they can see contemporary work, and so I'm also very mindful of building a marketplace, if you don't skewer me for saying that, building a marketplace or building a collector base in Chicago that can sustain all the great work that's being done, whether you're a represented or an unrepresented artist. I think art fairs can do that by virtue of the opportunity to just have to showcase this extraordinary material, and that's of interest to me too. You know, I want students to attend. I want neophytes or those that never would think to go to an art fair to walk in and go, I can't believe this, or wow, look at this, or why, you know, why is this that? And all of that is part of the, you know, creating a greater discourse that keeps all of this going.
Sweet. Amy, your turn. Go ahead, Amy.
Hi. Tony, I had a question about the in situ program you talked about for the site-specific and large-scale works at your art fair. Can you describe, I mean, it sounds like you choose a new curator every year. Do you accept applicants? Are there internal budgets to support bringing a large-scale work, or is that, again, on the gallery? How does that work?
That's great. Great question, actually. And there's probably many different ways to do this. For us, you know, we just launched the program last year, so, you know, some of the parameters are going to change in the future. But, you know, we're working to do, you know, right now I would say we'll do a curator every year, and that seems to be a system that is our intent. The cost of the installation is borne on the exhibitor. So what will happen is once the exhibitor list is set, the curator for this year will work within those parameters. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't an opportunity for that curator to go outside of the exhibitor list, you know, with the right kind of project, but it's our intent to make sure that that is being done, again, based on the exhibitors that are doing the fair. And this individual will start discussions, you know, beginning, I would say, in May to, you know, find out what's available. But the cost, again, to answer your question, is on the cost of the exhibitor. I may support them a little bit with labor. You know, for instance, Tony Fair did a great installation over the entrance last year. He was represented by 2 galleries that were doing the fair, and I chose on behalf of EXPOChicago to cover the cost of the labor and the install, because it was easier for me to do that with the, you know, the machinery that was in there. So I probably will still cover many of those things if I can. Hope that is that a good answer?
Yeah, it seems more, and this is what I guessed with art fairs, that they're definitely, forgive the term, for high rollers, and you know, more for not for the independent artists so much, more for people who have those connections already established, and that it comes through more the dealer in the gallery, which is kind of what I guessed about art fairs, but I'm always curious about how internal structures work and how they differ from fair to fair. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Amy, I think it's as a professional contemporary and modern art fair, I have to work within that parameter, and to some extent that's challenging to me too. I think everyone that knows me knows that I'm a big tent kind of individual, and I want everyone to participate, and I will try to find ways to make sure everyone participates. But for the sake of the art fair, I have to work within the structure of exhibitors that are doing that, and so it's very difficult for probably an unrepresented artist to have, you know, a large-scale site-specific work in the fair, because I would be doing a disservice to the dealers that are spending the money to participate. That's the simple equation.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you know, one of the things that I hope to see happen, and many of you may know that we announced what was called Expo Art Week this last Tuesday. Expo Art Week is really this opportunity for the City of Chicago, the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, and Choose Chicago, and other institutions to work with the fair to say, come to Chicago and, you know, experience a number of things that are happening during that week. Excuse me, if my cat just decided to jump up on the computer here. But what I hope happens is everyone takes advantage of this. I mean, we're committing a great deal of money and resources to make sure that the art world collectively comes to Chicago during this week. And I'm hoping that the core of Expo Art Week means that whether it's yourself or others finds ways to, you know, create an installation or do a number of things so we can, you know, that the whole city is enlivened or activated to make sure that, you know, your work is being exposed if that's what you want. And I think that in the spirit of what I hope this art fair serves, and again, I may sound like I'm repeating myself, I really want it to serve the greater ecosystem of the arts community of Chicago. I've been in Chicago for 30 years. It's important, you know, not only referencing the legacy of what it meant for international cultural tourism, or will mean for international cultural tourism, but hopefully what it will mean for you to make some connections, whether you're represented or not. And that's why I'm here and what I hope that the fair does.
I think we're running close to out of time, but we still have some questions. Tony, let's be a little quicker, okay?
Okay,
Andrea. No worries. Andrea, go ahead.
There, I have what's probably a similar question to Amy's, or what you were just talking about, of what's the opportunity for an artist coming just as an attendee. Do you think people really connect with potential representation at art fairs, knowing that those people, those gallerists, are really trying to spend their time with potential buyers? I mean, you know, what's the protocol of trying to chat up a potential gallery place while they're in the midst of a fair?
It's a great question. I think the best thing that I would say, oh, I'm sorry. the best thing I could suggest to any artist, you can say hello to my cat, is to make sure that you're mindful of that, as you just said, the dealer's real important need during those moments. I think the easiest thing to do is take a look, survey the galleries without even necessarily talking to them, unless you can find that quiet moment. What I mean by survey is you have a chance as an artist to look at a number of different programs and who you might want to be represented by, or who might be showing work that is speaking to you that really matters. And I think you might find that resource equally as important, because you can quickly look through and look at someone's program. I think that there's protocol in any moment. I mean, look, I talk to dealers all over the world at art fairs, and I try to find a moment where I'm not bothering them either. And I'm a fair director. I might go in and say, listen, I'd love for you to consider Chicago. Now's not the time to talk, but I hope, down the road we can have a minute to chat. And I leave. And, down the road, I find my moment to send them an email or go back. And I think that probably applies to an artist approaching a gallery as well. Some galleries really welcome those moments, and others would say, there's a protocol.
About another 20 minutes.
Okay. Sorry.
I think basically it's something you don't do. And we will cover this more when we talk about how to get a gallery and how to grow these kinds of relationships. Yeah, I don't think I disagree with what Tony's saying.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
No, that's okay. I was just underscoring what you just said. I think art fairs are a tough time for an artist to approach a gallery.
Gosha, your turn.
Oh, I was just wondering if Tony, if you see any differences between Expo Chicago and Art Chicago in terms of the kind of work that those two fairs promote, or Art Chicago promoted, in terms of the audience that was targeted.
You know what? I think that I'm in a unique position because I was involved with Art Chicago for several years, and Shirley had been around Art Chicago for many, many years. I think that the bigger differentiation point is I wanted to make sure that we were attracting the top contemporary and modern dealers in the world again, and I think that the list of dealers that returned to Navy Pure last year was quite different than several years of the latter years of Art Chicago. But that doesn't mean that the patrons or the missions for either of those past years were any different. I mean, they, and all art fairs want to attract the top collectors and dealers in the world, and curators, and there's no art fair that doesn't pursue that. I just want to make sure that what we are presenting as a fair is the best. Again, I've said it's quality, not quantity. My commitment to the art world is not to build a mega fair, and I'm saying that because I believe strongly that by limiting the size of the fair and keeping the quality extremely high, we're doing a service to not only the galleries that are participating, but the collectors that are actually collectors and curators that are coming.
All right, two more questions. Let's be quick. Let me mute everybody here. I feel like I got too much noise. All right. Oh, maybe we only have one more question. I saw a hand up, but tomorrow your hand went down. Tough. Okay, yeah, go ahead. And Birgit, you get to be last. Go ahead, Tamara.
Thanks, Tony, for all this information. My question is, where do you see art fairs going? With what the changes you've seen going from 300 to 300 plus, what's the future of art fairs?
Gosh, I wish I had that crystal ball. And that sounds like such a cop-out as an answer. I don't see art fairs going away. I find that, and I think most dealers would say it's a critical part of not only their program, but building their collector base. I think there may be, at some point consolidation, you know, where there is now 300 fairs. Again, I'm making that up, as I said earlier, that may go down. I think some fairs may or may not make it in the long term. I'm surely bullish and hopeful that Expo Chicago plays a role for our city for many, many years. But I think that there'll probably be some consolidation. The sheer fair fatigue, I think, will come into play. You know, I'm conscious of that for curators and collectors going around the world, although part of the draw of art fairs is the broader experience that a collector gets, a collector or an attendee gets when coming to the city. You know, they get to come to the city and not only go to the museum exhibitions that are up, but they also get to go to restaurants that they wanted to go eat in and entertainment. And so art fairs become opportunities to serve a lot of different of the visual and performing arts and drive cultural tourism. So again, to answer your question, I don't see them going away. I just want to make sure that we continue to refresh Expo Chicago every year to make sure that we're relevant to you and relevant to collectors that are attending.
Cool. Thank you both. Birgit, last question. Take it away.
The question is, do you notice any differences between European art fairs versus the American art fairs? Their program versus the American program?
Boy, it's a good question. In fact, I wish I was faster as an answer. You know, the internationalization of the art world, as well as any economy in the world, has. I don't know if there's that differentiation. I mean, I think that if you go to a great art fair anywhere in the world, you're going to find that the tenets of the art fair are the same. Great programming, great respect for the artists and the dealers that are participating, great respect for the conference and panel discussions. I mean, I think that's a hallmark of any great international fair. I don't think it's European, Asian, American. I think it's, you know, art fairs now know that they have to serve you know, a broader international base. And I think that we all strive for, you know, greatness in programming.
Wonderful. Tony, it's been a wealth of information. And, you know, I mean, part of what we try to do in the class is demystify the art world and explain how it works. And I think, you know, we all have a much better understanding of how art fairs function because of your candor. So I totally appreciate that. Let me unmute everybody here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony.
Everybody. On Wednesday, we're going to Laura Latinsky's studio, those in Chicago. I will send you a reminder and directions tomorrow. Everybody else, I will see you next Monday. Everybody, thanks so much. Good night to all of you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.